Would you join me in a word of prayer? I remembered coming here Monday, Lord, and a student asking me why I like teaching here. And my answer kept coming back to me in terms of not only the students here and the faculty and the staff, but cultivating an environment of always learning. And you have cultivated that in us, a humility, a kind of longing to learn more. Yes, learning more about you, and yes, learning more about ourselves, and also learning more about each other. There are obstacles to that because we live in a fallen world. And so I pray that today we get to learn a little bit more about you, a little bit more about ourselves, and a little bit more about one another. Would you give us humble enough hearts to be open to what you have to teach us? Thank you for your graciousness, your kindness, your presence, and your desire to transform us more and more into the image of your Son. And all God's people who agreed said, amen. All right, welcome. I believe Dr. Longinow left off with you'll be writing a lot. Did you already go through this slide? That's just a heads up, folks. You're going to be writing a lot. But can I interject this? Yes, you'll be writing a lot, but you're going to be writing about things that you're going to be experiencing. Writing is just the way that you're going to be communicating with us via your papers and your assignments. But what we're really looking out for is what's going to happen to you. What are some of the experiences that you are going to be engaged in? And one of the things that you may never have thought about is giving us the opportunity, the God-given opportunity, for us to see transformation in your life via your experiences and via the articulation of those experiences on your papers. So yes, you'll be writing a lot. As part of the course requirements, you'll be blogging, interviewing, writing about encounters, and writing a final reflection paper. Are we good? Second to last slide. You'll be reading a lot. Those who read a lot generally write better. So if you're going to be writing a lot, it's going to be evidence that you'll be reading and that you have been reading. The book that Dr. Longinow is requiring you to purchase is Quoting God. I've started to read this book. It's really interesting, bless you. It's really interesting, and I'll be following along with you. Cultivating this atmosphere of learning, I'm going to be learning a lot along with you. I'll be learning from our journalism majors. I'll be learning from our comm studies majors and our bio major and our film major. I will be learning from you, and we'll both be learning together. So let's enjoy this book together as well. The book that I'm requiring you to purchase is Reconciliation Blues, and I don't know how many of you were able to hear Edward Gilbreth last time when he was on campus. Did anyone catch his chapel? Yeah? What'd you think? What'd you think? You liked him?
I think it was good. It was good. I was curious to hear what his writing was like in comparison to his speech.
Excellent. I'll be interested in hearing that. Okay, good. Anyone else catch Gilbreth when he was here on campus? Okay. Maybe the next time. I certainly hope he'll be back. Part of the readings as well are a couple of articles that I will have uploaded for you on Blackboard. One is called Gestures and Postures from Andy Crouch, Making Culture. And another will be by Koenig on New Testament hospitality. So those articles and chapters, you won't need to do anything except download it from Blackboard, print it if you need, and everybody read it. All right? So I think we're good there. You'll be reading a lot. There's Badaracco's, there's Gilbreth's text. Reading about racial reconciliation, I am getting copies for you of Biola's position on the theological imperatives for diversity. It's a lengthy text in terms of the work that we put into it, but I think you'll find it a very interesting text to engage with. And of course, study of scriptures, and if you looked ahead on your course outline, you will have seen some of those things on our course outline. You'll be talking a lot too. So those of you I don't want you to get anxious. You'll be divided into groups. Please, please do not grow anxious about getting into groups. All right? Everyone will be in a group. Your groups have already been prayed for, and so you will be just fine. And we're going to be getting into groups by the end of our class session today. All right, so there are a couple of things. If you would just take note of the last two, your groups are a good way to take this class outside the classroom and to build community. One of the core values here at Biola, as well as you'll be constructing a journal with your weekly takeaways. The pad of paper that I gave David to start with our attendance, you'll be getting a sheet of paper and you can use one of your own. But what I'd like for you to do is after your groups today, each person will be writing their takeaway of the day. And the reason why I don't want you to do this later on when you get back to your dorm rooms or wherever is because you probably would have lost it. I want you to stay here and I'll give you the last few minutes of class, just to jot down your takeaway. Now, they'll be collected, they'll be looked at, and then given back to you. And by the end of the semester, I would like to see the whole of your collection of journal takeaways collected for us. Does that make sense? So don't throw them away. We read everything you write. Please don't ever think that we're going to assign you busy work. We read everything you write. All right? Okay. I think this concludes Dr. Longinow's presentation. So if you give me about 15 seconds, I will switch over to what we're going to be doing today. Okay, theological integration. This is an integration seminar. What does journalism have to do with theology? And what's theology got to do with journalism? At one point in today's session, I'm going to divide you up into your respective categories, the BBST category, those of you signed up under 465, and those with your journalism PR 315. And then I have a question similar to these to pose to each of those groups. As you will defend and explain and describe, then what does journalism have to do with theology? And what does theology have to do with journalism? We talk about personal identity, and I'll give you time to jot these things down. We will talk about personal identity based on whole life stewardship. Oftentimes when we think about theology, we think simply of religious things. Or when you think of journalism or public relations, we think of that in a particular category. And we very rarely think about how does this fit into the whole? How does this fit into the whole of human story? Well, here's some points. This is a presupposition. Every individual is made to be, in all life, God's steward over his creation household. That is our calling. So we have to begin to think more broadly. There's something that gets in the way. It's our sin. And our sin is what disrupts, both internally and externally, our serving out this role of being a steward, a good, God-honoring steward over his creation household. Thirdly, it's a theme of redemption. Redemption implies restoration in this role as steward over God's creation household. Discipleship is all of life, not relegated just to religious works. So I can tell already we're beginning to kind of rattle some cages, where categorically we think of journalism, categorically we think of public relations, categorically we think of theology. And what we're beginning to do is there a convergence? And what might that look like lived out? Lastly, stewardship will continue to define our eternal role. Our stewardship now, amid scarcity and sinfulness, is preparation for an even more glorious stewardship without such limitations. There is a future end. There is a future goal to this. And as you've written each of these 4 points, the next PowerPoint slides will echo these and kind of build on these 4 points. You'll see as we move on to the next slide. A personal perspective, this is what needs to be developed, a personal perspective that sees work and economics spiritually, not just materially, kind of breaking down those categories. And we're going to see this convergence. Here's the first point. Work and economics, including the disposition of work and its fruits, usually wages, and the larger structure of economic activities and institutions that facilitate work. These provide indispensable meaning, purpose, and fulfillment in cultivating creation as God's steward. Again, we're seeing a convergence, a blending, seeing this overall picture of God's perspective of us being his stewards over his creation. And in conjunction to that second point, we see that we sinfully treat money and other secondary goods as though they were ultimately what matters most. In our economic lives, in the economy at large, and in our approach to problems like poverty, we focus on that rather than our role as God's cultivating stewards. What is it about our sinful nature that gets us derailed away from what our calling and our role is as God's steward to maybe the secondary issues? And we get kind of caught up with that. And related to the third point on redemption, a personal perspective that by restoring our relationship with God, redemption makes all our work spiritually fruitful, even though it is materially futile. It still brings purpose to what we are doing now, in the here and now. It's called redemption. I have a little story about redemption I hope you'll understand. Some of you know that I was in Jamaica for a month while I was on leave. And no, I wasn't on the North Shore at Ocho Rios, just kind of taken in the sun every one of those days. I was in Kingston. The first 2 weeks I was in Kingston, Jamaica, I was by myself. The third week, my husband joined me. And the fourth week, a couple of our children were able to join me. One of our daughters came down, and she's a speech-language pathologist, and that's why it caught my attention, the communication majors. She's a speech-language pathologist who's fluent in sign language. We were at a market one day buying food for our meals, and she happened to ask a question. She looked a little puzzled and asked a question of one of the persons who was working there. It just so happened that one of the persons working there was deaf. Come to find that it was the policy of that store to hire people who were deaf. So she started using American Sign Language to this young person, this young man. Interestingly, a number of other people who were deaf came into her vicinity, and she would sign to them as well. It was wonderful. I pulled out my iPhone and I started videotaping it, and a friend was looking over my shoulders and asked me what I was doing. I said, I love moments like this, because the bottom line theme that I see whenever Ashley does this, or whenever I see this on campus, or when I see this in the newspapers, is I think of redemption. And that's what this third point is. By restoring our relationship with God, redemption makes all of our work spiritually fruitful. Tell me, what do you think was going through the minds of those who were in that market, black Jamaicans who were deaf, seeing someone of Asian descent, probably clearly from the United States, signing to them? What would that have made you feel? How would that have made you feel? Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. What does it make them, how does it make them feel when you even try?
Stoked off their minds.
Stoked out of their minds, yeah. And I would add valued, that you would pay attention and even consider what I might need. Yeah, excellent. For others who don't know American Sign Language and don't live with anyone who's deaf, what do you think might have gone through your mind had you been one of those in that supermarket? What do you think? Exactly. A way to communicate with someone, not, again, across seas and across cultural boundaries. Now, there are a couple of cultural boundaries here, weren't there? What were they? What were a couple of them? What are the cultural boundaries here?
Different race.
Different race, absolutely. What else? What do you think of an American being in Kingston? What do you think? Tourists. So they have the money to come to Jamaica because most Jamaicans won't ever have the money to go anywhere else. Yeah, good. What other cultural boundaries? Yeah.
Well, I kind of think of like if you're silent, like signing in English letters, like would they understand that?
Yes.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's a cultural boundary there. We talked about this, the deaf and the hearing, between races, between economic differences, and probably social differences. So there are a lot of cultural boundaries that you wouldn't have thought of first off in this encounter. And so we see this theme of redemption, that suddenly all that we do can play a role in God's restoring and in our role of stewards over his creation. And lastly, because it is spiritual, all of our work is eternally fruitful, even though it is temporarily futile. Oh, does that make sense? We have a purpose, and it is toward an end. Okay. Would you ponder and answer this? Journalism PR majors, you need to help convince us of the answers to this. So would you again proudly raise your hands, those of you who are journalism PR majors? Okay. And the rest of us who didn't raise our hands, we need to be really attentive because I'd like to hear, because I'm learning as well, what does journalism do? What does public relations do? Could you answer that for me? I think many of you are juniors and seniors, so you have been at this for at least a few years. Tell me, what does journalism do? And what does public relations do? The floor is yours. Yes?
it facilitates communication in a community. It informs, enlightens.
Okay, informs, enlightens, facilitates communication, and we're already talking about a community, so you don't have communication with just one person, you're communicating with a number. Okay, good. Anything else? Journalism? Yes?
It's like being around the world.
Okay. Things of human interest as well as global interest. Okay, and there seem to be some things that kind of attract, grab our attention, some things that don't, but still need to be told. All right, good, excellent. Journalism, PR. Yes?
It provides a way for you to share what you're passionate about and why other people should be passionate about the same things.
Okay. And we have to be very clear at articulating that because we want that message to get through, correct? Okay, good. PR majors. Yes?
You're finding the best way to communicate with your public and your audience.
The best way to communicate with the public, which is your audience. And what are some different venues for that?
Well, right now the biggest thing is online and like social networking.
Ah, okay. So our PR majors are becoming more adept because this generation is quite adept, I believe, when it comes to social networking. How does a PR major excel in that? Okay, so how do we connect with the person who happens to be in your audience? Correct? Okay. Now, for those who signed up under BBST 465, do you have any questions for our journalism PR majors with regard to what journalism or what PR does? Any questions? Okay. Journalism PR majors. What function does it serve in human culture, journalism and public relation? We've talked a little bit about communication. What function does it serve in human culture? And you can almost link it to that fourth question. What goods are absent in a setting where journalism or PR is not practiced? Yes.
Well, since journalism is, I see it as telling, a lot of times telling stories that wouldn't be told otherwise. You tell stories for the people who can't tell these stories.
Yes.
And so in that case, I mean, that does a lot for human culture. That's when there isn't journalism, there are voices that are not being heard.
Very good. Well articulated. Good. Any other thoughts? Yes.
On top of just informing the culture and just the people that we're trying to reach, it also just seems to have a really big influence on them. Just journalism as a whole has an influence on the community and the culture.
Okay. So it sounds like there are a number of different communities that are impacted by good journalism. Not only your audience, but perhaps peers. Okay, good.
I think it provides unity and like today when a lot of things are global and so people are in a lot of different places and moving very quickly and it the information is shared so people are kind of moving along and tracking with each other instead of being fragmented.
Very good. One would think that with the ability to social network and the ability to communicate globally, that we should have a greater knowledge of one another, a greater desire and longing to know about one another. One would think that. And I think in a perfect world that would happen. But there are things that get in the way, aren't there? Okay. What are some preconditions that are required for good journalism and good PR? What are some preconditions? Yes?
Humility.
Okay. But we don't have humility classes. You know, we don't have a book that we can pick up and kind of take some exams about humility and how we can grow in humility. So that's going to be a challenge.
The ability to learn from others.
Okay.
Never assume that you know everything.
Okay. Yeah. Sometimes we have to learn the hard way. Okay, good. Other preconditions? Yes.
An interest in other people's lives.
How does that get cultivated?
Because you need to have an interest to get people to talk to when you're doing interviews and stuff. You have to know what to ask them. You have to actually really genuinely be interested for them to want to like share their entire life with you.
Okay. It sounds like there needs to be an element of trust in order for that sharing to take place, correct? Or that revealing to take place. How does one cultivate trust? By listening? Whoa. Okay, did any of you in the audience just feel a little ouch in that comment? Anyone? Or is it just me? All right, and I'm not even a journalism major. All right, good. All right, excellent point. Yes. How do you develop trust? Integrity.
Through your actions and the way you go out your practice, you can be trusted.
Okay. So it sounds like not only an attitude thing, but also an actions thing. Okay, good. So that what we say and what we do are one of integrity. What we do and what we say echo one another. All right, good. Any other thoughts? How do we build trust in order for someone to reveal their life story? Yes?
You have to be transparent. Like sharing personal stuff about yourself sometimes, like when the occasion is right. Allows
Okay.
more trust.
Okay, and I like that qualifier, when the occasion is right, because we have to be sensitive to the timing of when to disclose those things, right? Okay, excellent. Okay, any other thoughts? This seminar needs to paint a positive picture of the value and nature of journalism from within a Christian vision of human life and culture. It needs to give a Christian student a sense of how the journalism task contributes to a Christ-centered vision of human flourishing and what kingdom purposes it serves in this present age. It will no doubt have to include certain elements of cultural critique, since this is a fallen world. But it should not be limited to such elements. Your thoughts on this quote. I came across this quote and I thought, oh, I'd like to hear what you guys have to say about this. A Christian journalist or a Christian person in PR might well be more than merely a journalist or a PR folk, but she cannot be less than a journalist or a public relations representative. Your thoughts? Excellent point. Why limit it to journalism? Why limit it to PR? Why limit it to communication studies? Why limit it to biology, right? Excellent point. Any other thoughts? Well, here are some questions that I mentioned that I'm going to have you broken up into 2 groups. And I want you to think about, in fact, I would like for you to get up because sometimes an hour is too long to even sit. I'd like for you to gather your, I think we can trust each other, leave your stuff, but grab your person and move to one side. Journalism PR, let's move over here. You'll probably take a larger segment of the room. And for our, anyone signed up under BBST 465 over here. And this is what I would like, now this sounds interesting. It would seem as though I would switch these around, but I did this on purpose. Bib Studies majors or anyone signed up under BBST 465, what does journalism have to do with theology? And for our journalism majors, our PR majors, what does journalism and PR have to do, I'm sorry, what does theology have to do with journalism? It's going to force you to think. It's a little bit out of your comfort zone. But I want you to come up with some points and we're going to share them. Here we go. Are we ready?
Yes.
Journalism PR folks, here's your question. What's theology got to do with journalism?
Amy, use our answer.
All right, so we came up with a few things. First of all, as studiers of God, which is what theology is, we have the duty of representing ultimate truth. And truth is very important to journalism. It's basically the center of what we're communicating. People are trusting journalists to bring truth to them in the form of information. So the second point that we had is that understanding theology allows us to understand human beings. We have a perspective that humans are fallen, which informs the rest of our writing about humanity. Thirdly, we are responsible to know other faiths, but also come from the perspective of our own in our writing. And fourthly, we're held to a higher standard in our work because of our theology, because we have a foundation of who God is. We understand that He expects excellence from us in our work. And that's related also to the ethics of journalism, which involves truth, credibility. If you're in the journalism field, there's a lot of do's and don'ts. And they've kind of existed since journalism began, but we have a foundation in God for why we're truthful, why we have integrity as a high value, why we don't want to harm people in our information, but we want to help people. There's a much more solid foundation for that rather than, well, this is what journalism was founded on. It goes back to that. And lastly, our theology informs how we interact with people in our field. During interviews, we're not viewing human beings as an object of our profession, but we're viewing them as souls, as valuable to us, and also in our interactions at work.
Excellent.
That's it.
Excellent.
I feel like you have one more.
Go ahead. You want to add one more? Here's an addendum.
What?
Did you have an addendum to this?
Yes? Or no? Group support, no? I'm not sharing ours? I won't know. No?
So you're
I'm going to
very
share it.
satisfied with our answer.
Okay, fine. I'll share it later. Pretty important. We all got support earlier. I don't know why it's being shut down now.
Okay. You're gonna do the humility thing right now. And thank you. All right. All right, Marina is going to present this group. Now, it's a lot smaller, but it doesn't necessarily mean that their input is any less valuable. So for the journalism PR majors, would you listen carefully to their perspective and then their answers too? What's journalism got to do with theology? Okay. And again, you guys had to think about this, huh?
We did.
Yeah.
We came up with that journalism allows a way to communicate religious ideas where it wouldn't normally be discussed. It's a conservative side to something instead of the usual liberal side of things that's being published. Journalism is writing about the truth, and the gospel tells the truth. And we spread the gospel with theology, and journalism is a way of spreading news through the world. So those are
Okay.
our ideas.
All right. Some of that didn't sit real well with some of you, did it? So, as a rejoiner, what would you add? What might you add? Yeah.
I would say that journalism refines theology, or it can. It can be used as a tool for the study of God, because it's concerned with finding the truth and asking questions that maybe people don't want to ask in lieu of tradition.
Okay. Okay, I'm taking that to understand that sometimes when we think about theology, we automatically think that everyone is a sound theologian. But can you have incorrect thoughts about God and still be theology? Absolutely. Yeah, excellent point. Any other thoughts, comments? Yeah.
I think it's wise to be careful about labeling journalism with Christianity as conservative or liberal, because that so easily gets swung one way or another. And normally in a negative light for Christians, that you say it's like conservative journalism, people think Fox and uncredible. And,
Oh, yes,
right,
yes.
everyone's just awful.
Yeah.
So it's really, as journalists, it's important to make sure that although your conservative viewpoints come out, whatever they may be, that you don't get stuck in the box of conservative.
You know, one of the things that I'm hoping to learn from this class and to learn from each of you is just how important journalism is, how influential good journalism is. And I know I'm going to learn a lot from you and your encounters with the readings and your encounters on your papers. I know I will. We have a lot to learn, don't we? Those of us who signed up under BBST 465, we have a lot to learn about what journalism is, because in our minds, journalism is what shows up on the front page of the LA Times, if we even read the front page of the LA Times. So you will broaden our understanding of journalism and its importance as it converges with sound theology. That's a huge responsibility. And I hope all of us glean from all of you how huge that responsibility is. It is large. And so you will teach us a lot. Any other thoughts, comments? Yes?
I just want to note that, journalism isn't always positive, which is a good thing, because journalism can reveal how depraved our world really is, and can drive us to dependence on God once we realize how rampant sin is and that we need a Savior.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Sound theology. Okay, good. Any other thoughts, comments? Good comments, folks. Good comments. Any other thoughts, comments? Things you're looking forward to in this class? Okay. The next slide I'm going to show you, these are some themes. It's not an exhaustive list, but it's some themes that are characteristic of journalistic practice. And you've actually heard some of it here. Concern for the disenfranchised, speaking on behalf of those who have no voice, and granting a measure of power to the powerless. That's kind of come up a little bit in our conversation. Here's another theme, serving as that fourth estate, kind of breaking down that hierarchical society. Here's serving as the fourth estate, a sort of extra governmental check and balance, pursuing and revealing truth and forcing truth into the public's eye. Again, that's come up already in our conversation. Another theme, hope and redemption. You're going to see that oftentimes in the course of our semester. Hope and redemption, telling the truth of positive events that are often ignored, human interest stories that kind of go under the radar, and all we're are longing to bring them to light. And lastly, but certainly not the only last one, suffering, making the suffering of the world known. Can it be a subpoint of the fourth estate? Possibly, but when we separate it from government and establishment power structures, these focus on the suffering itself. So these are just a few themes of characteristic of journalistic practice. And perhaps we'll come across more in your writing projects. Remember, you'll be writing a lot. I've mentioned a couple of times the things that get in the way. And I'm not sure if we'll get back to this. Let's kind of save this. Some of the things that get in the way of good journalism. Some of the things that get in the way of sound theology. And perhaps, if you give me just a few moments, some third graders can show us a little bit about this. Innocent third graders. 15 minutes. Now translate that into a lifetime of growing up in a particular culture, perhaps growing up in your culture. And just for once, or maybe multiple times, stepping out. What is it that cultivates or that formulates our vision, our understanding of other people? Yes, it's clear from the video that we watched that there are some clear differences. Blue-eyed, brown-eyed, black skin, yellow skin, brown skin. This video showed us what happens when there are differences that we cause to be discriminatory. But here's the important question. Those were obvious factors: skin color, eye color. What are we going to do then with the things that potentially cause discrimination that are invisible to us? How will we respond to the visible differences? Secondly, how will we respond to the invisible differences? Thoughts on what you just saw? It's an old video, isn't it? Dr. Longinow and I were thinking maybe 1950s? We don't know who the adults are in that classroom. Were they the very children, now 25 years later? Or were they the parents of those children? We don't know. But put those thoughts together and let's popcorn this. What are some of your raw thoughts after seeing that short 4-minute video? Yeah.
It was intriguing to me how quickly brown eyes, it's just an adjective that's just stating what the color of their eyes is, and it suddenly, for those kids, have all kinds of bad connotations just
Yes.
because of external factors. There's nothing inherently bad about brown eyes, but suddenly they were told these things.
Excellent, excellent. I'm going to piggyback on that thought. What formulates our understandings of what is acceptable and what is not acceptable? Popcorn this. What formulates our understanding or our grading scale, so to speak, of what is acceptable and what is not acceptable?
Parents.
Parents? What else?
Society.
Society? Let's develop that a little bit more. What about what in society helps give us that input?
Media.
Media. Develop that a little bit more. What forms of media?
Radio, television.
Radio, television, magazines, billboards, internet. Certainly. What describes your definition of beauty? So that you have a definition of beauty and anything outside of that is ugly. Right? 15 minutes. Third graders. Great comment. Thank you very much. Other comments, your raw thoughts. Your raw thoughts on this.
I think it's just interesting how one thought or idea, or even just in the media picture, even just in a quick glimpse, just can make friends, enemies, and can just change a whole mindset.
Yeah, yeah. I'm just blown away every time I watch this and how quickly that happened. Yes?
I was just going to add to that. It's crazy how, like, just something that seems so dumb to us, how she pointed that out, it seems like that's so ridiculous how you can just say blue eyes and brown eyes and blue eyes are better. But that really is how ridiculous it all is. When you put it like that, it changes your whole mindset of our society now, you know?
Yeah. Let's broaden that out a little bit. Can we look at some of the parameters that have defined for us what beauty looks like or who we should discriminate against? And can we look at them and think, wow, that is just utterly ridiculous. What have we bought into? Interesting thought. Other hands, yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think it's who it's coming from, too, because she's an authority figure in relation to them.
Yes, so absolutely, someone who responded, parents, perhaps an administrator or a school teacher, sure, a relative that can show up, yeah.
I just think it's crazy how, I mean, we see this video and yet it's happening even today. I mean, not necessarily with, like you said, directly physical things, but I mean, even this room, I mean, journalists and us, and it's just kind of crazy how during the questions, even they felt that they had to defend themselves against us.
Right, right. Do you see a sense of humility that we're trying to cultivate here? Can we learn from those who are journalism and PR majors? And journalism PR majors, can we learn from those who signed up, a whole variety of those who signed up under BBST? Absolutely. Are we willing to hear each other's stories? Or will something get in the way? The obvious, skin color, socioeconomic parameters, how we dress, how we speak, how we walk. Or will we step beyond that and think, this is ridiculous? Why do we have these? Okay, what I'd like for you to do is we will have a list of small groups that have already been formulated for you, purposefully incorporating a BIB Studies student. But I don't call you BIB Studies because you're like a conglomerate of many disciplines. So anyone who's signed up under BBST 465 in the groups with journalism and PR majors, then what I'd like for you to do is form a group around, maybe no more than 4 around where you are. And I'd like for you to comment on what this whole session was about. What were some things that you remember from this particular session? I'd like for you to share it as a group. What were some things that you were struck by? What perhaps rattled your cage a little bit? You came in not knowing what was going to happen today, and now today, for this class, it's almost finished. What was unexpected? What rattled your cage a little bit today? I'd like for you to talk about it in your groups for about 5 minutes, giving everyone a chance to share. If you take a few more minutes, that's fine.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.